Thanks very much, and g'day New Zealand. What you neglected to mention is I'm a Kiwi, born and bred. I've been away for a long time. I left for a 4-week holiday, and it was 1982, and I haven't lived here since. And it's a bit weird to be standing on a Kiwi stage and thinking I might be speaking with an Australian accent. I'm really probably more of a Kiwazi these days than I am just a Kiwi. I'm going to get myself a glass of water, and I'm going to resist the temptation. Even though it is 6:30, I think, oh no, it's only 2:30, I think, in Sydney. Anyway, I can't tell you, I feel like dancing. This is the first time I've ever been on a stage in New Zealand. It's just beautiful to be back. And it's an honour to tell you my story. I think it's pretty much a uniquely Kiwi story, informed by uniquely Kiwi elements. And, you know, I want to tell it to you with just enormous gratitude for a sense of the place that I was born, and for what New Zealand gave to me and everything that's gone, you know, from the time that I left these beautiful shores. I want to talk a wee bit about my dreams, and I've spent the last 17 years working on the knife edge of the for-profit sector and the not-for-profit sector. I've made a lot of mistakes, I've cried a lot of tears, I've been part of some great successes, there's been a lot of joy and a lot of laughter, but it's been one hell of a journey. And when I think about it, it's been a journey that isn't just about dreams, but is really deeply connected to disruption. And I think when you think about it, disruption and dreams really do go hand in glove, because dreams often require real disruption to actually be fulfilled. And disruption opens doors for us to be able to dream really differently and think really outside of the box. So I think disruption and dreams, for me anyway, go hand in glove. And I want to set the context, before I tell you about what I've done and the whole journey, the sort of context that I see in the world that I've been working in now for nearly 2 decades, trying to bridge the two divides. And the first context I want to set is the global context. I'm glad you all laugh at that. You know, there are some people I show that to who are a little alarmed by it. Global disruption. For me, this is the key thing that's happening in terms of global disruption. It's global inequality. You know, we're living in an era now where 1% of the world's population own 48% of the world's total wealth. We're living in a world where the 85 wealthiest people on the planet have the same amount of wealth as the bottom 3.5 billion people. And we're living in a world where that is growing, that inequality is growing faster and faster by the day. It's a world where inequality, for the first time, is beginning to become a genuine threat to our global economic system, where we see for the first time the chairman of the Fed, Janet Yellen, talking about inequality as a serious threat to the economic growth engine of America. It's a world where we see some of the greatest economists of our time, Nobel laureates, Joe Stiglitz, talking about the fact that he's seeing not only the developing world and the developed world as 2 different communities, but America itself as dividing into 2 entirely different speed economies and communities. And he says it is the nightmare towards which we are all inexorably heading. That is the context of the world that we're living in. And as business leaders and as people who have choice, I think we really have to acknowledge that and understand that in our thinking about what our role is. Because that inequality is creating a whole lot of knock-on impacts that are going to impact our businesses and our lives. At the root of global poverty, because of the root of global poverty, we're seeing endemic disease, we're seeing unrest, we're seeing failed states, we're seeing terrorism, we're seeing massive disruption in supply chain economically, we're seeing huge consumer uprising. We are seeing the rich walling themselves in and criminalising the poor. That's what we are dealing with in terms of global disruption over the course of the last few decades. That's the context I see in the global economy. And then I look at a really great disruption, which is the corporate disruption. There's been a whole lot of talk about that at this conference. I'm really excited about this disruption. You know, 17 years ago when I kind of announced that I was going to run an investment bank for purpose, not for profit, which I'll tell you about, you know, people thought I was either a complete bullshitter or, you know, completely crazy. So the business community's view was, you know, you can't be serious, Audette. You're not really going to run an investment banking for purpose, are you? Is it a tax dodge? The development community's view was, who the hell are you? You ran a bank in an offshore tax haven. You must be a money launderer, a tax cheat, or a drug dealer. Get out of our valley. Nobody believed that it was possible to run a hybrid institution or a business for purpose. One of the really joyous things about the last couple of decades is finding myself becoming almost mainstream. As we've seen this, and I think this word is being used, this revolution of thinking around the role of business in the world. We're living in this information age where there is no place now for the corporate world to hide. And so our actions as corporates and business leaders, they're immediately followed up on by people who are watching. So we're seeing this huge pressure for change coming from the consumer. We're also seeing those wonders, Gen Ys and millennials. I love that statistic, about 40% of them saying, the purpose of business is to affect social change. I was schooled on Milton Friedman. The greatest social responsibility of business is to make money for its shareholder. That was only in the 70s and 80s that was everybody's view. So, in the corporate context, I think we're seeing just this radical change in the way that people are thinking. And that is, to me, incredibly exciting. So the idea of hybrid business and non-profit, reaching across divide, this is mainstream thinking. Hooray, at last. And you see it from this conference itself. So against that backdrop of disruption, good and bad, I'll tell you about my own disruption. And I wanted to tell you about it, as much as I can really honestly. I'm not a business person who decided to give back. I'm a real typical Kiwi girl. And I was born in Dunedin, raised in this beautiful country, never worried about whether I'd have a roof over my head, clean drinking water, safety, unbelievably well loved by two amazing people. The landscape of my life so beautifully painted in. And when I think back on those times and what formed me, if I had to pick three things, these are the three that I would pick. I don't know how many of you here remember the Springbok tour. So many Kiwis, we were out on the streets twice a week, 90 days. People threw bottles at us from pubs. And Pākehā, Maori, Samoan, Tongan, New Zealander of every stripe stood up and said, no, we do not want the Springbok tour to come here through this boycott. And I was a young woman at university, and that time profoundly shaped me. I remember thinking, no matter what, I remember standing in front of the Red Squad. I remember being pulled off streets, by various arms of the New Zealand Riot Police. And I remember thinking, I will always, always stand up for what is right. Huge, huge influence in my life. I'm so grateful for it. The second influence I call out is the time I spent cleaning. I spent 5 years, I studied arts law. I'm a really bloody great cleaner. And I ask you, how many of you walk in here today and look around and wonder, the cleaners did a great job. How many of you have ever asked your cleaner what their name is? I cleaned office buildings for 5 years, every night, 6 nights a week. And when you're a cleaner in this country, you clean with Samoan, Tongan, Maori, people who speak multiple languages, often English not being their first. Here was me, little Pākehā girl, with the hair all the way down to here. What a bloody honour it was. What respect I learned, for those people. And I tell you, one of my most favourite business moments was around cleaning. I used to clean the executive suite of one of New Zealand's largest publicly traded companies. And so I had a big smock and long hair, feather duster, a Walkman, and I'd go in every night. And this is how old I am. This is back in the day when you could smoke in offices. And there was the guy who was the executive director of that company. Not only did he smoke in his office, he used to stub his cigarette butts out on the floor, on the carpet. Yeah, he was a serious pig, this guy. And you just knew he beat his wife. And so I would go in, the way I would handle this office is I would go into the office every night, and the first thing I'd do is go over to his office, shut the door, clean the rest of the office, and then face that nightmare last. Anyway, here I am one night, and I'm cleaning away. I got my vacuum cleaner, and out of nowhere, suddenly there's a tap on my shoulder, and I turn around, and it's him. It's the guy. And so I took out my earpieces, and he said to me, and I said, yes. And he said, you, girl, you, come with me. And this is how people treat cleaners, by the way. So I followed him into the men's urinal. And we got to the men's urinal, and he pointed at the urinal, and he said to me, "You see that girl? That spot there? You always miss that." And then he turned on his heels and he walked out. And I swear it, if that guy had walked past me 2 minutes later, he would not have remembered me. That's how nameless I was. But I never forgot him. So roll forward 7 years. And I'm working for a big English law firm in Hong Kong, and I'm appointed by investment banks to come back to New Zealand to lead all the banks worldwide on refinancing that very same company's multi-billion-dollar debt. So I am no longer the girl who forgot the urinal. I'm the girl with the key to a lot of money. And I walk into the first meeting, I swear it, this is true, the first meeting with the board. And as the door opens, the board all rise as one to greet me, because I'm the girl with the money. And the first guy to put his hand out, Mr. Urinal. Cleaning taught me about respect. Respect everyone, not only because it's good values, but because it's a very, very good life skill. And the third thing that I'd say that really formed me... Okay. Did I tell him who I was? No. Did I make sure that he had a very, very push to the edge of it time on that deal? Yes. I'm really worried about telling that story here in case that gets back to the... tried to obfuscate it sufficiently, but yeah, no, what a moment. So the third thing, Kiwi thing that really formed me was jumping out of aeroplanes. I've done nearly 1,000 skydives. I spent a lot of my life, Manawatu skydivers, jumping out of aeroplanes, hanging on, outside of aircraft with my best mates. And I tell you, when you're a skydiver, you don't care where somebody was educated. You don't even care what their last name was when you're out the door of an aeroplane with them. All you care about is how safe they are in the air and how much fun are they to go jumping with. Jumping, the other thing that jumping really taught me, and I've jumped in Australia and New Zealand and all over the world, jumping has really taught me about taking risk. That you actually can live quite a long way out on the risk spectrum very comfortably, as long as you use your brains about that and you're not stupid about that. So those three things really underpin the truth of who I am. And as I said, I was studying arts law. Everybody who knew me very much expected, and I expected my life would be human rights work. And then I was jumping in Australia at the Aussie National Parachute Champs, and I busted my knee. And I had to finish my law degree in Melbourne. So for the first time, I'm at an Ivy League university, and I'm sitting with a student who tells me the reason he's studying law, and he thinks this is obvious, is because QCs make $6,000 a day. And for the first time in my life, I'm confronted with money. And I have this moment where I think, oh my God, I don't know about money. I do not know about power. How am I ever going to change the world unless I know about that? And that was a really seminal moment for me, and everything from there really unfolded. So the little skydiving, cleaning, social justice activist, I took a big left-hand turn, horrified everybody in my tribe. I went to do mergers and acquisitions financing, went to be a lawyer, went to learn, and had this amazing, lucky career through banking and law and insurance. I've covered off on all the pariah professions. And I have to tell you, I've really enjoyed it the whole way. And I find myself, incredibly lucky to sit on the board of Australia's largest general insurance company, and I learn a lot about money and power. And I learn about another world, and I learned about my own prejudice against that world when I stepped into it. And so I had spent this incredible time. I'd been advising balance sheets, then I was running a bank. I ended up running a publicly traded bank. I chaired a stock exchange. This amazingly lucky career. And then it was kind of now or never time, Audette, how do you bring these worlds together? I wanted to learn about this stuff to affect change now. It was time for me to do it. So 17 years ago, I made the kind of giant leap into entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship. I wanted to bust up a couple of ideas that I had been thinking about with business eyes. The first one was, no offence to the men in this room, but the philanthropy was for rich old white men. I just suddenly realised, you know, that's how philanthropy was seen. It was sort of end of career, end of life, you know, the last stage, giving back. And I just wanted to bust that idea and see if you could do it all the way through. The second thing I really wanted to bust up for myself was this idea that business was there to serve its shareholder. Because actually, when you think about it, business is just a construct, and you can use it any way you like. So Adaro and the way that we've structured it unfolds really from those couple of pieces of thinking. The other thing that when I looked at models with my business eyes of traditional philanthropy, and just earmarking here, I cannot speak enough of the respect I have for the non-profit community. I respected them deeply before I began 17 years ago. I respect them even more deeply now. But one of the things that I saw when I started to think around models was, you know, I've been managing this bank, and when you run a bank, all you think about is how you match your assets and your liabilities. That's what banking is. On one side assets and other side liabilities, you make the margin in between. And then I started to look with those eyes at the traditionally funded non-profits, and I realised I'd never seen a worse asset liability mismatch in my life. You know, on the ground, when you're trying to achieve behavioural change or work with vulnerable client groups, that's decades. That stuff takes decades. And yet what you've got as a funding model is this kind of really capricious funding stream. You know, this year your donor really likes Save the Whales, you know, next year he wants to do mentally ill, you know, so you've got these really short-term funding streams, really long-term responsibilities, and all this stuff comes out of that in terms of the impact on the model for non-profits. The greatest non-profits in the world suffer from this issue. What happens is they become donor-driven. So the top people in their organisation, instead of worrying every single day about evidence-based best practice service delivery, they worry every day about what my donor wants. And often it forces them to do stuff on the ground with their projects that actually might not be entirely developmentally appropriate. You know, the donor says, I want to take my kids to your project. The donor says, you know, I want to send a whole bunch of soccer balls halfway around the world, when you know that you can buy them at a tenth of the price, you know, on the ground and support local economy. So you get all this really kind of dysfunctional behaviour coming directly from a model issue around traditional funding. The next thing I saw about the model was that I've watched these business people beating up non-profits about admin costs. But I've been running a bank, and I knew if you're in the private sector, you know if you don't have great core costs, if you don't have seriously good core services, you can't deliver a service or a product to save yourself. Yet somehow non-profits who are doing this immensely complex work, with all sorts of overlays, ethical, religious, you know, and failed states sometimes, really difficult client groups, somehow they're supposed to have a 10% only admin cost. So what happens is they're forced to obfuscate their costs and tuck their costs away, which causes suspicion amongst the business community because they get the sense that they're not seeing it all through the numbers, or they live on the smell of an oily rag and they can't retain staff for long periods. And so my question when I started to look at that was, how can you run a car without a great engine? And the third piece, looking at the model, which inspired me to do what I've done, is thinking about research and talking about mistakes. And again, purely about the model, donor-driven models. Firstly, research is really expensive. And secondly, you know, when you're worried about the donor giving you money next year, you don't necessarily want to tell them that you just blew away that last $500,000 and didn't help anybody. So talking about mistakes threatens the financial viability of a non-profit, and it also stops them talking to each other about mistakes a lot of the time because they're competing for donor dollars. So all of that seemed to me to be ripe for disruption, for a new way. And Adaro, I should tell you, you probably know if you Google any of this, we were ISIS for the last 17 years. I could now speak in sort of Business 101 classes about what it's like to wake up and find your brand taken over by the world's currently most notorious terrorist group. So it's kind of quite a new thing to be standing on the stage talking about Adaro. So formed as the ISIS group now, wonderfully the Adaro Group, a very simple concept. I knew how to make money through corporate finance work, banking deals, advising major international corporations. And then I decided that I could hire a bunch of really brilliant business people and tell them that their job was relentlessly make money in the financial markets, and at the same time hire a bunch of brilliant development specialists, create an INGO, and say to them, your job is to relentlessly think about evidence-based service delivery to people in the most remote locations and co-locate them. Put them all together, one purpose, service to people in extreme poverty, particularly women and children. And it doesn't matter whether you serve, whether that service comes from knowing how to do a brilliant corporate finance deal or being the greatest neonate specialist the world's ever seen, we're all together. So that's what the model is, and pretty simple in terms of the concept. In terms of what we do, I should say too, and you'll hear me say this again and again, it has been a journey of mistakes. I still walk in every day and I look around and I cannot believe that we are still afloat. But the truth is, we now fund a payroll directly of about 55 development specialists, about another 150 indirectly. We have touched hundreds of thousands of lives. We're serving about 50,000 people a year. And the little business that I've got knocks out $100,000 every single month on month, to donate across to the development arm, which sits in the desk next door. Like the wonderful Sue Biggs, who runs our INGOs here, and so we're always joking, I make the money and she spends it. And we've done that year on year, so it's been millions and millions of dollars. I've covered all the admin costs of the whole organisation out of the business, and so I'm putting in about $1.5 million a year from the business, and we've been incredibly lucky to get another couple of million from a handful of amazing financial partners. So with $3.5 million a year, we're touching about 50,000 lives, and modelling something we hope, that's important. In terms of the work itself on the ground, you heard that the specialties we have, and I'm going to talk a wee bit about that, but I want to talk about how we think about executing service. We think about it with 3 pillars. First is research. I've had PhD anthropologists on my team right from the first day. Thank God, they've taught me so much about thinking about behavioural change. And so research is really deep for us. We run research teams in Uganda and Nepal, but run out of the University of Montana as well. We have done social and clinical research right from the beginning, and we have faced down our mistakes absolutely with bravery. We don't hide from what our research tells us. The second kind of pillar for us is service delivery and projects, loosely health and education, and I'll tell you a wee bit about that. And that's really hands on the ground, and that's done with our own staff in Uganda and Nepal, putting our hands on the ground, and a handful of brilliant community groups that we've worked with for a long time on the ground as well. And then the third limb for us, which is a really, really big scale, if you like, if you want to put it into kind of the new terms, is knowledge sharing. We talk relentlessly about mistakes. We open our doors to everybody we can. We want to take years off other people's learning time. If somebody wants to learn how you do remote neonate ICU in a low-resource setting, they come on into us and we tell them everything we know. We want to take years off the learning time of others, and that's really, I think, how we, in the end, will touch the most lives. In terms of the maternal infant childcare, these are our tiniest clients, and our tiny baby clients. And to give you a sort of sense of the setting of this, I'm not going to drag you through all the work, but just to give you a sense of what this is like. This is a little hospital that we've partnered with for 17 years in remote Uganda. The first time I went there 17 years ago, when I drove up the drive, they have a population of 500,000 people that pool into this hospital. 70,000 of them are HIV positive, and they had 2 doctors in those days that were in the hospital and about 50 support staff. And so it was a bit like fighting a war, going onto the wards every day. And one of the things that really struck me in those early days in the hospital was that there was nothing at all for the kids, just nothing for babies at all. And about 25 babies a week died in the hospital of entirely preventable causes. And I remember one day being there, and if a little baby is born, I don't know if any of you have had preemies or babies go through neonate ICU, but if a little baby is born early, sometimes they'll be a bit yellow, they'll be jaundiced. And all you do, if in New Zealand or Australia in the West, with that is you whack them under a thermal heat lamp. Well, what happened in Shawoko was those babies, they would put them on the windowsills, or they would hold them in the sun, and in rainy season they all died. The cry from the community was enormous about finding support for these neonates. The other cry that was enormous was the entire non-profit community who told me, you cannot deliver tertiary level medical care in a remote low resource setting, do not even try. I cannot tell you how many people said to me, the best you will ever do is whack an immunisation into a baby in those kind of places. And I just did not buy it. So where are we today? All Ugandan teams. We take about 1,000 babies a year through NICU, 3,500 mums through maternity, and that hospital now is a centre of excellence for the whole of East Africa. It has a training session. We are training people. We have Path, we have Gates coming down to the hospital, Partners in Health. We've just been asked onto the Every Newborn Action Plan, which is a global group, to talk about how you do it in a low resource setting. It has been the most joyous work that you can imagine. And whenever I'm stressed and I'm in Uganda, I just get up and go to the NICU. And check out those babies. The next thing that we're kind of well known for in our space is really, really remote work. And just to give you a sense of that, our most remote project, 25 days walk from a road. And to give you another, yeah, it's very cool up there. In fact, I'm supposed to be up there in June, and I've got a good excuse not to go, and the real reason is I really need to get to do some training to get back up there again. It's very special up there. And to give you a sense of how unbelievable and remote it is and what a privilege it is to work with these communities, it's the last place in the world, it's on the Nepali-Tibetan border, where the dominant marriage order is polyandry. And what that means is one woman will marry all the brothers from one family. Yeah, you just have to think about that a little bit. But with anywhere else in the world, the women are astonishingly characterful, empowered, and laugh their heads off like we all do about these things. So we've been working up there for 17 years. It was the epicenter of the Nepali Civil War. And we have ended up doing a very wide range of interventions, all Nepali teams. The one amazing villager I met the first year I took before I set the business up to do all this is still with us. And the first school we ever built up there and got involved with, still operating, 65% girls, in a community where literacy rates for women are about 15%. We've done a very wide range of interventions up there, loosely health and education. We are experts in greenhouses and solar and Tibetan medicine, and all driven by community, all driven by our amazing teams. Third thing that people know us for is the care and support of kids at risk. I'm going to show you a video about this because the kids and the people that work with us say it much better than I do, but this is a world I never dreamed I'd get into. It's a world I fell into. We work with abused kids who've been young boys who are abused or HIV orphans on the streets of Kampala, so we've had a small street kids project there for a long time. A beautiful project to watch these boys turning into unbelievable, wonderful young adults. And the second really big piece for us in this area has been in Nepal. As a result of the civil war in Nepal, believe it or not, there are still people in the world who are Maoists. And in Nepal, the Maoists took over the region we're famous for working in, Humla, the very remote place I was telling you about. And of course, as soon as you have a civil war, the next thing you get is child soldiering. Maoists said family has to give a child over the age of 12 to the cause. The next thing that happens is a bunch of predators appear up the mountain and they say, give me everything you've got and I will take your child to safety. And the next thing you get is a whole lot of kids being trafficked. And this is work that took me to some kind of dark places in the early days. You know, the littlest kids we pulled out of basements were 3, but I can tell you they're now 14. And it took me to some dark places, but actually it's provided me with more joy and sense of the resilience of human beings than anything else I've done. So let me introduce you to them directly because they're going to tell the story way better than me.
The country and the people are deprived of basic things in this part of the world. Nepal was in a very difficult circumstance, difficult political situation in terms of because of conflict.
The mother and the family members were expecting that their children is going to boarding school and having education and having good situation.
I was afraid at first. I didn't know who brought me, where was I. So I was very afraid and scared what will happen with me.
The children, they were not sent to school. These children were sent begging in vegetable markets to beg some vegetables, fruits. This was how these children were living.
They had rashes and different kind of skin diseases, and even one had pneumonia.
But it was very difficult situation, and two of the kids in particular, we thought were going to die. I've never seen children in a worse condition.
They're living in a very risky circumstance, and we rescued them with the help of government of Nepal.
The trafficker had custody of them. He wanted us to buy the children from him, and we refused to do that. And it took us probably 18 months to actually get legal custody. It was shocking to them that they would have their own bed. Remember that?
Yes, yes.
And that they would be separated. That was the other thing that was really emotional, because they'd been all together.
So first we try to work with their health, emotional health, physical health, and then we started with the education.
The most difficult part that I felt in the beginning was whether I would find the families or not. I just got their names, that's all. So I had to travel to different 9 districts to find out each and every family. And I showed them the photos and they were shocked. Talking about that, oh my God, it's so difficult.
These kids are now a kind of hope for the Humla community. They are doing so good in the education, they are so well protected.
So we learnt our way into residential care for those kids. Then we learnt our way, sobbing our way through it, into figuring out how to reconnect those kids to their families of origins. And now, because of our amazing Nepali team, we're learning our way into independent care of those kids.
So once they turn about 16, they get a stipend and they go into independent living houses, or they find their own apartments. The stipend allows them to shop and buy their own food and cook and clean and manage their money. And we can see before our eyes these children who we rescued 7 years ago blossoming into wonderful young adults.
If you educate people, it affects everything, every segment of life. So they are learning to be a contributing member of the Humla community.
I have good education and I feel that I will do something for my family and my village when I grow big.
It's really important that we continue with the program because we're only halfway there with these kids. They've come so far already. We're trying to really get them to a point where they can take responsibility for their own lives, but also the lives of their families and their communities.
I always say like ISIS, more than project, ISIS manages life.
Just ask you to think what it's like to run an investment bank with an outcome like that. Okay, I want to just end with people. A lot of people ask me why. You know, it's $9 million, you know, that I've put in from the business. It's about 22 million that amazing people have given us. It's been a big journey for 17 years. And there are a couple of ways that I can sum up why. I can't put words around how much this journey has enhanced my life. But in terms of the why, this is an Aussie cartoonist called Lunik, who I particularly love, and this kind of gets it for me, you know. It's bombs raining down on a field of hearts. I take you back to the start, about talking about global disruption and context. I am such a lucky woman to be born in this country, to have had the life I've had, with the choices I have. The people that we work with, they don't have choice except to survive. The choices that I have had, you know, why would I ever have stood anywhere but on the side of the hearts? You know, it's a really beautiful place to stand. And the other way I would sum it up is with a beautiful quote that I love from the Tao, and I hope I'm not going to mangle it, but let me end with this. It goes like this: if you fill your cup to the brim, it will overspill. If you sharpen your knife too much, it will blunt. If you chase after money and power, your heart will never unclench. If you worry about what other people think about you, you will forever be their prisoner. Just do the work and step back. That is the path to serenity. Thank you.